Neptune transiting my moon by opposition. This took place when I was in my sixth form at school, so I was like 16, 17, 18, that kind of age range. And it took me through a period when actually my grandmother died, and I left home, and I reformulated my understanding of my mother and my relationship with my mother. Now, these are all moon-like things. Grandmother, I didn't notice that she represented the deepest sense I had of security and comfort and homeliness and home and these kind of moony qualities. My mum didn't really give me that. She gave me a different level of security, a kind of a disciplined level of security, Saturn in Virgo level of security. I get things right. I know how to get things right because I concentrate on the detail and I discipline myself to get it right. Saturn in Virgo, and her sun was conjunct my Saturn in Virgo. So that's more what my mother gave me. But my grandmother, she gave me a sense of wholesome well-being, registered in the smell of her house and her cooking, and the sense that I would not be subject to discipline, nitpicking, convenient, routine kind of way. Like if I did something wrong, she'd speak up about it. But otherwise, live and let live. I relaxed when I was with her. And I had no idea that this was going on. I just was young and she was just giving it all the time. So that was grand. That's what she did. I didn't notice that it made me feel good. Strangely, I was not noticing my feelings at all. And so Neptune comes along and opposes my moon. And it brings me to a new realization well after she had died. She died, I think, when I was 16. And it wasn't really until I was 18, 19, actually the tail end of the same transit, that I came to realize that that warm, loving, cozy feeling I used to have regularly every time I visit her, which was often, that was no longer present in my life. They lived in Falmouth in Cornwall, about 200 miles from where I lived. And I continued to visit my grandfather, but he was an austere man and he had no capacity to create the warmth that my gran could. And I didn't realize it. I just came to this popping of a bubble that my mother was giving me warmth and care. It just wasn't true. And I noticed this when I was leaving home. Um, Interesting, I went to university and I went to the closest university I could get to, about an hour and a half's drive from where I lived. In England, you must move away from home to go to university. So I didn't want to be a long way away from my mum, my mummy. I had no idea I was homesick, that I was tied to the apron strings of my mummy. I hate the idea with a vengeance, but that was the truth of it. And I didn't know that until I went to university and I felt homesick and absent of belonging. I didn't feel I belonged to my mother and father's household and home. I spent every moment I could trying to get away from them. And my gran was no longer there. And I felt lost, actually. I didn't do very well at university. I decided to leave within one term, and I only did 1 year. I didn't get my degree. And that was because I just didn't connect with anyone. All these people were very, very intelligent. I hadn't known that before. I was not the brightest in my class, but I was up there. I was respected for being not stupid. I go to university and they're all wondering how the hell I managed to get in because I just wasn't quite at their level. So that was disturbing for the first time to realize that my supreme ability and so on wasn't so supreme, or and I wasn't quite so able as I previously thought. That was a disillusionment of my security system because I felt really secure because I felt bright and intelligent and capable, and I learned that no, other people don't think so when I went to university level. And I left university and then took a position in a place where I was once again the brightest. Um, Questionable behavior. So that disillusionment with my mother was very profound indeed, and it didn't catch up into my conscious understanding for a long time. Maybe we have to go to another Neptune moon transit for me really to get the message here. But most assuredly, the information was there for me in this first transit. Another thing was really clear is that insofar as the moon is my belonging, my sense of belonging, I felt that most profoundly within my age group. These were the people that I spent all of my time with since the age of 5 when I went to school, and now come to university I lost it. But for that long period of time, I'd grown to believe in reality and to interpret events and what you're supposed to do next in terms of my age group. So that was my security system, my age group. And I really understood what was going on in the world through them, particularly our music. And I was born in 1951, so I was the right age to appreciate the musical revolution as it dawned in the 50s and flowered in the 60s. It was our music that was actually having a political impact. The the effect of the love generation on events in the world was very profound indeed. On one level, we had a huge economic impact because spending was usually older people, and then teenagers got hold of sex and drugs and rock and roll, all very expensive things on one level. And we started spending money because there was money to spend. The economic boom of the 50s were moving into the 60s. So my age group started to create the mood of the day, the zeitgeist, in other words. We became responsible for that. Now, that was a Neptune opposition moon thing because we were not holding on to the things of the past. We were doing it our way. We were free of those who were worried about the war and poverty and austerity and building a new world. All that had been done by the time we became spenders, and we spent our money on pleasure. And that changed the whole economic kilter of the world, actually, starting with the West, but eventually now we see globalization has taken this initiative a lot further. It's profoundly spread throughout the world now. Now, all of that is an aspect of Neptune, and I felt that. We all felt that. I felt that all my life with my age group because my age group has got Uranus in Cancer and Pluto in Leo. So the Uranus in Cancer means that we're rebellious against Cancer things, home, and so on. And so we tended to have families with multiple partners, sequentially typically, multiple children, stepchildren and so on became much more the thing, not getting married, Uranus in Cancer kind of things. And Pluto in Leo, the confidence that goes along with Pluto and Leo, when seen when seen in an individual, becomes somebody like Stalin or Hitler or Churchill or Eisenhower, these mega stars of my period. They were absolutely confident. Well, my generation was. We just said, no, we don't want to do it that way. We want to do it this way. And we did. You know, we took over um, the development of society. The post-war society was made um, comfortable and beautiful and interesting because of the group of people who were my age. So that was my moony kind of involvement. It was like that. It wasn't particular in a mother. It was general in a generation. And that's not something I've thought about before. Well, that's something I'd like to just mention is that as I'm studying these transits in order to do these videos, I, I'm rewriting the narrative of my life. Lots of things happened back then that I never realized. Not only did I not realize it back then, but I actually never bothered to kind of unpack the transits fully, ever, until now. And I didn't realize it until now. Certain things happened then that were profoundly important. And I just took it as normal. You know, of course I was strongly influenced by Pink Floyd, the Rolling Stones and the Beatles. You know, what's the point in thinking about that? Well, my parents weren't. And this generation, whoever they aren't. You know, it was my generation that got that. That was even a song of the 60s, my generation. So other people knew it, even if I didn't. Um, yeah, I did experience um, a real disconnect from my mother because of sort of various things she did that exposed that she wasn't actually on my side. When I went to university, my landlady kind of looked at me and sort of didn't really like what she saw. My hair was down the middle of my back, and you know, I was I wasn't a well brought up boy in her mind. My mother apologized for me, and I thought, how dare you? And then I kind of remembered when I had received my A level results just to say I could go into university. I got back one day, and everyone was sitting around saying, "Oh, your results have come." And up until that point, not much had happened in my life to speak of. And this was the most significant moment in my life, whether I'm going to university or not. Big deal in those days, very big deal indeed. And it came to pass that my mother had actually opened my mail. She read my letter informing me of my results. Oh, I wish I had access to my rage, which nowadays I have in that moment. I haven't stopped grieving that moment in all of these years since I was 18. That was the most audacious intrusion of my privacy I think I've ever experienced in my whole life. And if I was myself now, back then, age 18, I'd have done something absolutely outrageous. I would have ripped up the letter, thrown it on the floor, walked out of the room saying, "You're never going to see me again," and left home. That's how strongly I feel about that level of intrusion. And I didn't get this at the time. I felt not worthy of having the right not to be invaded. I felt invaded, but I felt so much lack of agency that I couldn't do anything about it. And that was my mother. She'd emasculated me. And on that very point, it was a thing that 16-year-old boys did around that time to carry Durexes in your pocket. A condom is a sartorial addition. You know, we'd have a condom in our pocket just to prove that we knew what condoms were. It's not as though anybody was sleeping with anyone, but And she found my condom and laughed at me. Oh, now I can feel it. Such an abuse of the power of motherhood took place repeatedly, you know, taking my landlady's side against me, laughing at my burgeoning sexuality, opening my mail. How dare you? And I didn't have those feelings at the time. I'm only now stoking them up to remember the moment. That was Neptune opposition moon, when the long, long process of becoming disillusioned with my mother began. And it took a lifetime. I finally faced her down in my 60s and said, what you did was for you, wasn't for me. You gave me stuff in order to make me dependent upon you. You imposed your authority over me because you wanted to do that in a bullying kind of way. And I more or less forced her to have this conversation with me about how she was in my childhood, but she wouldn't talk to me about it. And that was what happened at the end of our life together, just before she died. She just refused to talk about my childhood, and that was the end. I mean, there's nothing else to talk about, so that was the end of our relationship. However, all of these transits have got their advantages and disadvantages, we could say. In practice, you deal with a lot of shit. You deal with your stuff during an outer planet transit. There isn't any way around that. However, when you deal with your stuff, you go to the next level. You know, that's how it all works. And so, in this case, I actually discovered poetry. I hadn't had any interest in poetry at all. But at university, I started to talk to people who had, and they pointed out Leonard Cohen. And I was so taken by Suzanne, I remember, that I wrote it all out very neatly. And my landlady noticed this poem. She was sneaking through my bloody personal possessions as well. She saw this poem, and she just assumed that I'd written it. And she, I mean, fancy that. But imagine that I'd written the poem, Suzanne, and my landlady said, "Oh, sissy, writing poetry. It's not very good, is it? What's this nonsense?" The world's best poet after Rumi, for my money, is Leonard Cohen. Rumi's incomparable, but Cohen's the best modern day poet for my taste. And to be compared to Leonard Cohen was like amazing, to be thought of as having written his poem, you know, by somebody who was just ridiculing me for being soft. And soft was not okay for a man in those days. But I became soft. And I grew my hair, as I've said, and I carried my guitar around to parties, and I spoke poetry to people who wanted to listen, and that all developed at that time. And actually, that grew, and I became eventually a composer of songs and a writer of poems and so on. So that was not how I made my living for the most part, but it was a feature of what changed in me as a result of that Neptune opposition moon transit.